Hello, this is Brother Cromer from the Math Department. This is a supplement of Lesson 14 dealing with SPSS commands. And so these are the 4 different commands or tools that you'll be using for independent samples for Lesson 14. First, I'll cover histograms, then I'll cover the explore command, and doing something which is called recoding in the independent samples t-test. The first 2 you've seen before, but there's going to be a different twist to each of these first 2 commands. So first let's talk about histograms. So what I'm going to do is here's the data where we deal with groups, the 2 different groups. If you remember in the online textbook, there was a with the reading data, there was a developmental group, and then the general group, the control group. And then the second column here represents the number of nights they read with their children. The parents read with their children. Here's Dev, which is developmental group, and then later you see generation group. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to deal with the histogram. So I'm going to do graph legacy dialogue histogram, okay, like you've done before with histograms. And then I'm going to put the measured variable nights read per week with their children. So I'm going to put that here, okay. And now I want to separate out. I want to create 2 histograms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a group. I'm going to take this group variable, put it either in the rows box or the columns box. Now, if you put it in the rows box, it'll stack the graphs one on top of the other. You put it in the columns box, it'll stack 2 histograms you put the 2 histograms side by side. I prefer putting it in the rows box because I like having stacked one on top of the other. If you click on OK, here you see the 2 histograms stacked one on top of the other. I like this because the scales are similar when and they're stacked one on top of the other, so it's easier to see the shapes of comparing the shapes of the 2 different distributions. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is talk about the explore command in SPSS using independent samples. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do analyze descriptive statistics explore. Okay, so I'm going to put the measured variables nights per week of reading with their kids. But then I want to separate out the information. If you remember Explorer, it spews out a bunch of information: mean, standard deviation, min and max. You can do box plots, all these different things. But we want to divide up that information by group. And so how to do that is that you take the grouping variable and you stick that here. Okay, you put it into the factor list in order for us to divide the information by group. Going further, if we click on plots, we can click on get a histogram here as well. I recommend not using this, but you can. But quite often the scales are not the same when you do the 2 different graphs. Do normality plots with tests. That gives you your QQ plots. Click on continue and then click on OK, and then you'll see a whole slew of output here. Here you get your sample sizes here. You get the mean, standard deviation from both groups. Here you have 2 different histograms. And notice here, well, it looks like in this case that the scales are the same, but quite often those scales are not the same when using the Explorer command. So that's why I sometimes don't recommend that to students to get histograms from the Explorer command. I'd rather have you go through the histogram command. But then when you go further down, here's your QQ plots. It looks like that the data is normally distributed from both groups. And then at the very bottom, you can get 2 box plots. You can compare the distributions between the 2. Okay. Now the next thing is recoding. Sometimes you have to recode your data when it comes to dealing with independent samples. So if you go back to this data right here, if you have, for instance, if you have string variables that are too long, now these aren't too bad, but if I remember right, the variable view, the string variable is actually quite long. It's 300. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to do what is called the recoding, which is we use the transform automatic recode. And so what we need to do is we do transform automatic recode. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take, let's see, we'll take group here. We're going to stick that in here. And then we're going to create a new name. And we're going to call it, we'll call it group, we could just call it group recode or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. So we're going to add a new name, okay, and then we're going to click on OK. So then when we do that, then what we'll see here is that we've coded the two different groups. Just say it's just 1 and 2, and that's it. Okay, and we're doing this because SPSS, regardless of how long the string variable is here, now that we have the second variable group recode, it'll allow us to do independent samples test, which we'll do in just a sec here. Okay, and so now that leads us to the last thing, which is doing independent samples t-test using analyze, compare means, independent samples t-test. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do analyze, compare means, independent samples t-test. And so now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to put nights per week up here. That's the test variable or the measured variable. Instead of group, we're going to use group recode so that we can so that this will work. instead of group. And so how we define the groups, we have to look specifically how each of the different groups are listed here. And the two different groups are just listed as 1 and 2. Okay? And if you click on Continue, and if you click on OK, then you will get your output that you have here. Now notice here that it still even though we have group recode, it still lists the variable, the different variable names, the labels, the developmental and the behavioral problems label, as well as the children without developmental problems label. Those still are there, okay? And you get all the information you need with the independent samples. You have, don't worry about this part here. Some students refer to that, but don't worry about that. You get your test statistic, degrees of freedom, and p-value under the equal variance is not assumed row, and you also, from the equal variance is not assumed row, you get your confidence interval. You can also get your mean and standard deviations here from both groups from the first table as well. Okay, and that is the SPSS commands you need for lesson 14 dealing with independent samples.